Hello geographers, welcome to the Year 11 into 12 A-Level Geography Taster Session. Just a few instructions before we start. This is a narrated PowerPoint, which means that when you open up the PowerPoint as a slideshow, you will see a little speaker icon in the top right-hand corner as shown above. When you click on the icon, you'll be able to hear a pre-recorded narration from a geography teacher, which will help you to understand the information on the PowerPoint slide. Listen to the narration before completing each task. For this lesson, you will need a pen, a pencil, paper and a red pen, purely for marking purposes. If you don't have a red pen, just use any other colour pen that is different to the one that you would normally write in. The lesson is a typical A-level lesson to give you a flavour of the topic you'll be learning, and it links closely with the transition task that you will be completing over the summer in preparation for September. Details of that are now available on the Newman 6 website and on the 11 into 12 Geography Microsoft Teams page. Keep any notes that you make this lesson safely in a folder along with your transition work ready for when we start in September. Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the course structure. At Newman 6, we follow the AQA Geography syllabus, which is split into three components. Component 1 is physical geography, and in this we teach the following units: water and carbon, coastal systems and hazards. All of these are highlighted in yellow. This is assessed with a 2.5-hour written exam, which is worth 40% of the final grade. Component 2 is human geography, and in this we teach the following units: global systems and governance, changing places, and population and the environment. Again, all of these are highlighted in yellow. This is also assessed with a 2.5-hour exam, which is also worth 40% of the final grade. Component 3 is a coursework component or fieldwork investigation, where you are required to complete a research study of your own choosing. This can be based on human or physical geography and must be between 3,000 and 4,000 words in length. We base this on our residential field trip to North Wales, and it's worth 20% of the final grade. The course covers a series of key concepts or themes which run throughout the different units, and these are listed in the blue column to the right of the screen. If you have any questions about any of the course structure, please don't hesitate to email me. Details of my address will be given at the end of the lesson. Okay, so the title for today's lesson is What is Globalisation? And the lesson objective is to understand the meaning of the term globalisation and the factors which drive it. Just to make you aware, this lesson gives a bit of an introduction to the human geography transition task which you'll be completing over the summer, and is part of the global systems and governance unit which we'll be covering from September. Make a note of the title and the lesson objective onto your piece of paper. Okay, so we are going to start by just watching a very short video clip which explains the term globalisation. You can access the clip by clicking on the link below. Before you do, there are some questions which I would like you to consider before watching the clip. The questions are as follows: what is globalisation? Is globalisation a new concept? What drives globalisation? And who dominates the globalisation process? Quickly jot these down on a piece of paper. Then watch the clip and see if you can answer the questions. Okay, so now I want you to run through the answers to the questions. I would like you to mark your responses using your red pen. The answer will show in red when you click on the next slide, so that you can add any information that you have missed whilst you've been watching the clip. Okay, hopefully you have now marked your responses using your red pen. We're just going to quickly run through the answers together. So question number 1 was, what is globalisation? We should have established from the video clip that globalisation is the process by which countries become more interconnected both culturally and economically. Question number 2 was, is globalisation a new process? I think it was clear from the video clip that globalisation is not a new process. Countries have been trading with each other and exchanging goods for thousands of years, in fact as far back as the Middle Ages. However, the process has accelerated in recent decades. Question number 3 was, what drives the process? The process of globalisation has been largely driven by developments in communications and transport technology. These have actually enabled flows of information, capital, products, services and labour to move across international boundaries. For example, the development of container ships has decreased the cost of world transport and increased the volume of world trade, whilst technological developments like the internet and email have enabled people to access and distribute vast amounts of information. And finally, question number 4, who dominates the globalisation process? The production and distribution of goods globally is dominated by large transnational companies. These are companies that are based in one country but might have branch plants all over the world and therefore operate globally. This has enabled countries to access goods that they were never able to access before, but it's also enabled countries to access goods more cheaply from other countries. Okay, so this is a good break point for us to summarise and review the learning of the lesson so far. So hopefully we've all established that globalisation is the process of countries becoming more connected due to 2 things, advances in technology and advances in transport. If you haven't understood any aspect of the lesson so far, you can go back and review the previous slides. Okay, so we're now moving on to the second part of our lesson where we look in a little bit more detail at the factors which drive globalisation. So we're going to spend a bit of time just looking at some of the changes that have happened globally and how this may have accelerated the globalisation process. Okay, so there are 5 main drivers which have accelerated the globalisation process, and these are all shown on this slide. We're going to summarise the information relating to each of these using a mind map. I would like you to copy the mind map structure shown here on the slide across a piece of paper. You might want to do this landscape because it makes it easier to fit the information onto the page. Focus the structure in the middle of your paper so you have plenty of room on the outside to add any additional branches of information. All the information that you need for this will be provided on the following slides. Once you have read each slide, just highlight the important points and then add them to your mind map structure. If you've never done a mind map before, an example will be completed for flows of information to show you what to do. This will be shown on slide 12 of the PowerPoint. Mind maps simply give an overview of a topic by summarising the information into short phrases or key words. All the branches connect to show the links between the different pieces of information. They're a good way of breaking down a topic just into the main key points, and you might find this a useful revision tool for your A-level study later on. Okay, so just to reiterate what I said on the previous slide, what you've got to do here is read through the information that's on this slide, summarise it by highlighting the key points, and then add those key points to the relevant branch of your mind map, the branch that says flows of information. An example will be shown for you on the next slide. Okay, so one of the main drivers for globalisation is flows of information across international borders. Nowadays, information such as financial data or news of current events can be spread across the world very quickly and very easily. If you watch the news channels, breaking news can be transmitted within minutes, even from remote or very distant areas of the globe. This is mainly due to developments in technology, such as email and the internet and social media, which mean that large amounts of information can be exchanged instantly across the globe. This allows people in very different countries to communicate and work together. Increasing flows of information are making the world more interconnected. For example, it's now possible for people to learn a lot about different countries and cultures without even leaving their own country. All they have to do is carry out an internet search. As a result, we are becoming more aware of places which are distant to us and more connected to them. Okay, so you can see what I've done here. I've given you an example of how to do the first branch of your mind map. So what I've done is I've summarised all the key bits of information and I've added them to the flows of information branch of the mind map. And as you can see, all the different pieces of information link very closely together. I would like you to make a copy of this branch onto your mind map, and then I would like you to carry out the same process for the other branches. Only this time I would like you to do it on your own. Okay, so a second driver of globalisation is flows of capital. For those of you who haven't come across this term before, capital is money that is invested to produce income or profit. Historically, capital was mostly invested within a country. For example, companies would do this by building new factories or by setting up new branches within the country of origin. Over time, though, capital has shifted overseas and the amount of foreign investment has increased. This is known as FDI, Foreign Direct Investment, and this has increased from $400 billion in 1996 to $1,500 billion in 2016, a threefold increase in just 10 years. Improvements in information and communication technology, ICT, have encouraged flows of capital around the world. For example, money can now be moved instantly across the world via the internet. Increasing flows of capital are making the world more interconnected, with most countries' economies now dependent on flows of investment from abroad. Now, spend a few minutes summarising this information and then add it to your mind map. A third driver of globalisation is flows of products across international borders. Historically, manufacturing industries were located in more developed countries. The products being produced were generally sold within the countries in which they were made. However, in recent decades, manufacturing has decreased in more developed countries. For example, in the UK, the number of people employed in manufacturing fell from more than 5 million in 1985 to around 2.6 million in 2014. One of the main reasons for this is low labour costs overseas. This has caused many companies to relocate the production side of their business abroad. Products are then imported into the countries where they are sold. An example is the vacuum manufacturer Dyson. They moved their production to Malaysia in 2002, even though the vacuums are generally sold in the UK. As a result, international trade in manufactured goods is increasing. For example, the UK imported £200 billion worth of manufactured goods in 1990, and a further £550 billion worth in 2008. Changing flows of products are making the world more interconnected. For example, many of the manufactured goods bought in the UK are now manufactured abroad. Now, just as before, spend a few minutes summarising the information on this slide. Once you have summarised it, add it to your mind map. A fourth driver of globalisation is flows of services across international borders. Services are economic activities which aren't based around producing any material goods, like, for example, banking. Improvements in ICT have allowed services to become global industries. Banking and insurance industries depend on communication and the transfer of information. Improvements to ICT now enable services to locate anywhere in the world and still be able to serve the needs of customers anywhere else in the world. For example, when I ring my bank, I'm immediately transferred to a call centre in Delhi, even though the bank that I bank with is based in the UK. Deregulation in the 1970s and 80s meant that the rules which increased competition were removed, opening up financial markets to the rest of the world. This meant it became easier for financial institutions to do business in other countries. Services can be divided into low-level services, such as customer service, and high-level services, such as financial services. High-level services are generally located in the cities of the more developed countries, whilst companies are increasingly relocating the low-level services to less developed countries where the labour is cheaper. Increasing flows of services are making the world more interconnected. Now, spend a few minutes summarising this information onto your mind map. Okay, so the final driver of globalisation that we're going to look at is flows of labour across international borders. Flows of labour are movements of people who participate in the workforce from one country to another. More people are now moving overseas. International migration increased by over 40% between 2000 and 2015. Some people move because they have to, for example, to escape conflict zones. But many people choose to move for work purposes. Some migrants are highly skilled workers, for example those in ICT and medicine, who move to more developed countries where the wages and the working conditions are much better. Others are unskilled workers, who move to developed countries to look for work because of unemployment or poor wages in their own countries. Increasing flows of people between different countries are making the world more interconnected. For example, people bring aspects of their own culture with them. And countries are more connected because people now have family all over the world. Just as before, summarise the information on this slide and then add it to your mind map. Okay, so you should now have a completed mind map which summarises all the main drivers of globalisation. You can add symbolic images and colours to your mind map to help you to memorise the information. I will leave you to do that in your own time. This is a good point at which to summarise the learning of the lesson so far. So, in short, globalisation is driven by flows of information, capital, products, services and labour between different countries. And this process is making the world more interconnected. If there's any part of the lesson which you haven't understood, then I suggest that in your own time you go back through the previous slides and read through them again to make sure that you understand them. Okay, so we're now going to test our understanding by attempting to answer an exam question. The question I would like you to answer is as follows. Outline how changes in the patterns of production have promoted globalisation. Now this is a 4-mark question, which means that it is points marked. What that implies is you will be awarded a mark for any points made which are relevant to the question. And this includes developments in terms of explanation or the use of supporting examples. Have a look at the question carefully. Think about what you could write. I've included a structure on the slide to help you to formulate your paragraph. You have 4 minutes to answer. Have a go at writing your answer now. Okay, so grab your red pen because we are now going to mark our answers using the mark scheme on the following slide. Okay, so have a look at the mark scheme and with your red pen we can start to award marks for any points mentioned. Now it says on the mark scheme that you can award 1 mark for each valid point of knowledge and understanding up to a maximum of 4 marks. And you can allow marks for developed points or supporting examples. So, give yourself a point if you mentioned any of the following. Many companies have located the production side of their business overseas from developed to less developed countries to take advantage of lower labour costs. 1 mark. The products are then imported to more developed countries where they are then sold. 1 mark. This is increasing trade in manufactured goods, making the world more interconnected. 1 mark. The financial investment in the factories needed to produce the goods also increases flows of capital between countries, promoting globalisation. 1 mark. The movement of factories abroad can also increase the flows of people between the home and host countries. 1 mark. Bear in mind that if you've added an example, for example, some of you may have mentioned the example of Dyson moving their production to Malaysia, you can also award a mark for those supporting examples. Okay, so give yourself a mark out of 4 and then have a look at the model answer on the next slide. Okay, so we're now going to look at our model answer to just give you a bit more of a clearer understanding of what you could have written to answer this particular question. So let's just remind ourselves of the question first of all. The question was, outline how changes in the patterns of production have promoted globalisation. So let's have a read of this model answer. Patterns of production have promoted globalisation in that most production has now moved abroad from developed countries to less developed countries. For example, the British vacuum manufacturer Dyson moved its production operations to Malaysia in 2002, despite the fact that most of its vacuums are sold in the UK. This is because labour costs in less developed countries are cheaper and enable manufacturers to maximise their profits. The products are then imported back to the developed country where they are then sold. This process has increased global trade in manufacturing goods, making countries more interconnected and therefore promoting globalisation. In addition, the movement of factories and capital abroad increases the flows of capital and people between the home and host countries, which also promotes the globalisation process. What's good about this answer is that it puts enough information, enough points into the paragraph to guarantee the 4 marks. But at many points throughout the paragraph, it keeps going back to how the production changes have promoted the globalisation process. It's always better when you're answering questions like this to make sure that you write more points than is necessary because you want to ensure that you secure your 4 marks. This is the only type of question, a 4-marker, where you will actually be points assessed. The rest of the exam questions on the A-level syllabus are level marked, and we'll discuss that at a later date. Okay, so using all the information that we have gained this lesson, what I would like you to do is I would like you to draw this continuum that you can see here on this slide onto your piece of paper. And what I would like you to do is to mark onto the continuum where you think the world currently sits in terms of globalisation. So how connected and interdependent with other countries are we? So just mark onto it where you think we are. And then what I want you to do is justify your decision. So just write a few sentences to explain why you have put your marker where you have put it onto the continuum. Okay, so were you right? Did you put your marker in the right place on the continuum? If you have a look at this slide, you can see that there is a red zone marked onto the continuum and the world currently sits somewhere in that red zone. So if you marked anywhere in that area on the continuum, then you are correct. There is definitely a significant amount of interaction and interdependence between different countries as flows of information, capital, products, services and labour move back and forth between them. However, we are not at the stage of complete globalisation where the world operates as one single community. Countries still have their own cultures, their own languages and their own customs, which therefore differentiate one from another. Okay, one last activity then, just to finish us off. I would like you to think about whether the process of globalisation is positive or negative for our planet. I would like you to copy the tree map that you can see on this slide, and then I would like you to just jot down what you think are the positives and what you think are the negatives based on the learning that we've done for this lesson. Once you've done that, I would like you to click on the video link in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide and then watch the little video. And any additional points that you get from the video, I would like you to add them to your tree map using your red pen. Okay, so these are just some of the positive and negative impacts that were mentioned on the video clip. If you have missed any of these whilst you were watching, you can add them to your tree map now. Okay, for a final plenary activity, I would like you to explain in your own words what is meant by the process of globalisation. And then just as a little challenge for you, I would like you to look at the images at the bottom of this slide, and I would like you to explain to me how you think each of those images is linked to the process of globalisation. Just write a few lines for each image. And that brings us to the end of our taster session. I hope that you've managed to learn something and that you feel comfortable now about perhaps studying geography when you come back in September. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I will put my email at the end of the slideshow for you to be able to do that. Thank you so much for taking part, and I look forward to meeting you all in September.